Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I am your host, Deb Philman. I'm glad you're here for this episode of Dissident Dispatch. As always, if you are not yet a subscriber to this channel, please consider subscribing so you can be notified when I make new content. Please also like and share the broadcast so we can get other people joining us. I have Diana Blum, it's Blum, right? Here with me tonight. And if you have not already viewed Eli Steele's new film, Killing America, I hope that you will, like, immediately after this broadcast, so you'll have more context. But Diana was the main mom featured in this documentary, and I'm very privileged and glad to have you here tonight. I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself as you would like the audience to know you, and then we're going to get into discussing not just the film and what it set out to do, but also the censorship of the film. For those of you who aren't aware or don't follow Eli on social media, he tried to put the film out on YouTube and various places, and it was taken down. And Diana will explain more to us about that as well, such that you now can see it on Rumble. You can see it for free on Rumble, but you can't see it on this channel. And I just find that interesting and more than a little bit hypocritical. But welcome, Diana. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. A little background about myself. I was born in the former Soviet Union, Ukraine to be specific. I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and my family made the difficult decision to leave. I mean, it wasn't difficult to leave. I'm sorry, to make the decision.
Right.
It was very clear that they needed to get out because of the rampant anti-Semitism that they were experiencing. But it was definitely not an easy process. We ended up being stateless as refugees for almost a year in Italy, waiting for a country to accept us. And luckily, we were accepted to a city called San Francisco, which is where I grew up. So fast forward, I grew up pretty wonderfully in the sense that I did not experience anti-Semitism as a child growing up. And I unfortunately cannot say the same with respect to children today. And that was part of why I wanted to be involved in this film. But originally, what made me want to be involved was actually I was seeing how parents really don't have a voice when it comes to our public schools. When we bring concerns to either the teachers or the principals or the school board or the superintendent, we're always kindly listened to. There's always a smile and a nod and a thank you,
Sure.
and nothing is ever done to address the concerns. And in fact, over time, the concerns have been, getting gaslit almost, and growing and getting worse. And so this documentary was kind of a result of this feeling like we need to get the facts out and have the public understand what's happening, because it's not just in our schools. This is happening all across California and in the nation.
Well, what I really liked about it was the title and the thrust of the film, Killing America, is making the point that what we are doing through our children, through the schools, through these programs, which, as you point out, are all over the country. It's not just specific to California. It just so happens that what starts in California has a tendency to metastasize across the country because it is the largest state in terms of population of school-age children. I mean, it really just is. I mean, it could be a country. And so as a consequence, a lot of things get tested in California. A lot of things just get implemented. And then because curriculum developers and politicians and all kinds of different people get all of their material together to sell something to California, that they're not going to reinvent the wheel for all the other states. And ever since we had a Department of Education, of course, that it's tied to money that's facilitated. So, but Killing America is a perfect title because what you pointed out in the film is that through this and through our children, we are destroying what makes America America. And you pointed this out so beautifully with your own story in the film, describing being an immigrant, being a refugee, coming to a neighborhood where you were one of many minority refugee immigrant, ethnicities, religions, etc., in the true melting pot that we all thought about. So there's that part of America, the sort of you can come here from anywhere and you are accepted and you are an American. You're not this hyphenated person where you're going to forever be identified as Ukrainian or Jewish or, Muslim or Christian, whatever else you were. It's like you are now an American because you've chosen to live here and send your children to school here and work here and so on. And what you also pointed out in the film is that the American dream is making something of yourself as an individual. And what one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you and going to go over this for the audience is that I'm not sure people are connecting the dots, Diana. I'm not sure people are connecting that DEI, CRT, SEL, ethnic studies, like kind of all the alphabet soup programs in our schools are directly going after the two components, the melting pot component and the make something of yourself as an individual, strive and achieve in a measurable way as an individual. So, maybe you could speak to us a little bit about that, about your experience with the schools and what you've seen to that effect. First of all, am I getting it right? Is that like pretty much what you were hoping to get across? And then what else would you like to add about that?
You're absolutely right. There's a de-emphasis on the individual needs of students. So if you have a child that needs extra, attention, whether it be, reading help or, uh, if they have, say, ADD and they need accommodations, everything is kind of it, you're put into the same bucket. And certainly, if you have a gifted child that maybe, if they're gifted, they may be just gifted in one specific area, math or English, but they require a little bit more challenging classes,
Sure.
and that's no longer being offered. In fact, they're being taken away. When I first learned about this, because this has been kind of a slow process for us, it's been over like an 8-year process where one by one they've been taking away one class here, one class here. And when I asked about why is this happening, I was told it's in the effort of equity.
Right.
And equity seems to be defined as equal outcomes, not equal opportunity, meet children what they need and lift up, but it's more of let's lower the standard. And so I actually spent 2 years volunteering in the East Menlo Park, so the underserved minority community, to understand how is it that removing classes at the high school level actually helping the kids that are struggling, because the struggle starts earlier. And what I saw was it really wasn't. We're just recreating the same issues that now we're creating here at the high school level that are clearly rampant in the elementary. So kids are not getting their individual needs met way earlier than high school, although the administration or whoever's deciding this is the school board in our case to remove the classes at the high school level. It makes no sense.
Well, the film does a good job of explaining what are called feeder schools. And for those watching who aren't familiar with the term feeder schools, it's really just what you have probably in your own state, unless you live in a very rural area where there's kind of one school for everybody and all things. You tend to have many elementary schools, a few middle schools, and then like one or two high schools. Or even if you have 4 or 5 high schools, you still have way more middle and way more elementary schools, and they feed into those high schools. And because our populations, especially of urban areas, are not monolithic, they're quite diverse. And I don't mean by racial and ethnic, levels, but also socioeconomic levels, educational backgrounds, language ability. The film talks about the two feeder schools that have quite different language ability. If you have a school that's full of refugee or recent immigrant children for whom English is a second language, and maybe they got here in fifth grade or something, or they weren't proficient in their native tongue, perhaps, let's say, especially if they're a refugee child. And now you have them coming and feeding into those upper schools, as Diana points out. By the time they get to high school, there's still a lot of work to be done to, I hesitate to use the term catch them up, but get them to a place where the school can meet them where they are and give them a high school education that suits their language abilities, that helps them excel at, or catch them up in their language abilities, because that's what they need. But instead, if you're going to say, well, we certainly can't have honors classes for the kids who speak English as their first language and they aced elementary school, because that's not equitable. And we don't want to put these kids in sort of slower paced classes or ESL classes that are exclusively ESL, because that doesn't produce some kind of equal outcome. They're not going to be equal in terms of what they're receiving in quite a literal sense. So let's just streamline, I believe is now the word. Let's put them all together. And when you think about it, right, Diana, it makes no sense.
Right.
It's just, you wouldn't do that any other way with you wouldn't take in an emergency room and take the trauma patient and stick them in the same place that you have the person with the splinter.
That's right.
It just doesn't make sense.
Right. And the thing, what I observed when I was volunteering is that, there are some really bright kids in those classrooms. And because they're not actually being identified and helped along, they are just lumped with, unfortunately, when you have language, and I personally experienced this, I did not speak English when I came to this country. It was hard, but I was forced to. I mean, my parents really were like, you can cry, but you got to finish. I don't care if it takes you 5 hours, you're going to finish your homework. And there was this pressure. Now, here, what I'm seeing is, oh, you don't want to, or you have a hard life at home. That's okay. You can just go sit in the corner. These kids are not being challenged. They're not being and I don't like the word force, but it's almost like,
well, reality has a way of forcing you to do things. It's like I don't understand. It's they're putting them in a wheelchair because they're tired. They're not
that's
crippled.
exactly that's exactly right. In Russian, there's this saying, "Через не могу." Despite saying you can't, you still try and you do it. And what's the most frustrating is it's not due to lack of funding, because when you actually
Oh
look
no.
at the numbers, those schools are getting more per child, and
Mhm.
in the endowment, the foundation endowment. So why are we? It feels like, I mean, in watching some of the professional development that the money is actually going to, it's not going to how to improve reading, how to improve how to do math, or teaching the teachers how to improve their skills so that they can address all the multitude of educational needs. No, it's actually the money is going to these professional developments of DEI, SEL.
Yeah.
The emphasis is this oppressor oppressed framework,
Mhm.
and what the kids are actually being taught is they can't, and it's not their fault, it's the system's fault. Well, you're not really setting them up for success
Right.
by,
And they have no frame of reference to argue, nor do they have a vocabulary to argue. So they sort of have to take the big people's word for it. Doesn't there seem to be an underlying assumption on the part of all the people who push the sort of equity as the most important goal of schooling, that the that there's a sole cause for unequal outcomes? What I mean by that is that if we look at, whether somebody is graduating with honors or somebody is barely graduating, it seems to me that they'll take a true statistic, which is, let's say there is a racial disparity in the outcomes. Pick a racial disparity. But they'll fixate on a specific racial or ethnic disparity. So, well, let's ignore the Asians. Yes, many of them are immigrants, don't speak English at home, and don't have money. They might be even poor. So even the socioeconomically, they're not privileged, so to speak. But we're not going to look at that. We're going to just ignore that racial disparity in terms of their, overwhelming representation in the high success. Okay, ignore that. We're only going to look at sort of black and brown. I'm just going to call it out like what it is. We're going to look at black and brown. And we're going to see disparate outcomes and aha, it's racism. And we're also going to ignore low performing white kids. I'm going to ignore that. And therefore, there's the sole cause is racism. And so we have to get rid of the racism for these kids to do well. Well, how do we get rid of the racism? Well, we can't. They even tell the kids we can't. It's everywhere. White people are just inherently white supremacy, inherently racist. So if you can't get rid of the bad thing, and the bad thing is the sole cause of the unequal outcome, there's only one other variable you can change. The outcome. I mean, literally, the only thing you can like manipulate is the outcome. And in the film, you had a teacher who had to be anonymous, which is so sad, who talked about that, didn't he? He talked about what are some other ways that you've seen in San Francisco that they've manipulated outcomes to make it look like they're getting closer to equity.
Well, the standard-based grading is a perfect example. So as the teacher explained, now an A is 80 to 100%, a B is 60 to 80%. And so the folks that would have gotten an A through hard work, there's no more bell curve. It's most people, I mean, you have to get less than 20% to fail. And so the system is just set up. And as the teacher explained, he was getting in trouble for actually failing people, but he's like, what service am I doing to these kids by passing them when they graduate and they can't read? That they have a false sense of ability, and at the end you're setting them up for failure instead of actually saying, okay, you did not make it here, but here's what we're going to do to get you up, and then give those resources, summer school, whatever. And my first job was at the age of 13. I mean, I worked at Domino's Pizza, got a work permit, so their whole thing is, well, but these kids have to work. They have, yes. And that's the real world. The real world isn't fair. But if you work hard and you teach kids that, there is success at the end, yes, it's going to be a struggle. I actually, my perspective here is very, I get the other side. So because we live in a very affluent area, Atherton is probably the richest zip code here. And so I see the unfairness on the other side. But the solution is not, let's make it unfair also here. If
But
that
does
makes
it really
any
like
sense.
fairness, or is it just there are inequalities? I mean, we could look at all kinds of inequalities, and some they just are, and they aren't. To me, when I think of something unfair, it's like somebody was handed an unfair advantage that they didn't earn. Some of us jokingly refer to DEI as didn't earn it, because we are sort of doling out what we presume will make things fair. When you pointed out, you came here, you didn't speak English, you were a refugee family, even though your mom was a physician over in the Soviet Union. I imagine when she first came here, she didn't just pick right up with her being a doctor the
Never.
day she arrived. Never did. Okay. So that goes from being you're at one status and you're a refugee, now you're a completely different status. So, and yet, in your family, you are now a physician. You're now a doctor, a neurologist, I believe, right?
That's
Okay,
right.
well, I don't know all that went into that, but I can surmise that was a lot of work, a lot of education, a lot of time, a lot of sweat, a lot of stress, a lot of things that went into that. And you started out, as you point out, you were the poor kid, you were in the immigrant neighborhood, you were the one learning English as a second language. And yet here you are. And that was the America that you came to. That was the American dream that the film talks about, it's being killed. And what's tragic is that the kids who are you, like they're the version of you, but now let's say they're from Ecuador or something, or they're from Mexico, whatever. And they're not getting the opportunity that you had. To me, the unfairness that I look at is not necessarily their station in life. It's that they are now being arbitrarily deprived of the identical opportunity that you had, of high expectations, of actual standards, objective, measurable standards to meet that were no different from the other kids in terms of, of your similar intellectual ability. Let's say it's not like you take a child who literally is cognitively impaired. That's a different story. But if it's just a language issue, or it's just an amount of exposure to science issue or something, that can be caught up, that can be dealt with. So I guess the reason I harp on the unfairness thing is I want to make sure that people watching and the audience understand that we're not necessarily talking about unfairness in terms of the situation the person's in right now, but rather the approach to helping them, if you want to call it help, or the approach to educating them so they can access, to use their word, opportunity. And what I see at the schools and the school board meetings, they talk a lot about access. They talk a lot about opportunity. But I think they're using a different dictionary, Diana, than you and I are using. Even with the fairness, I think they're using a different dictionary than we're using.
So I guess I might push back a little bit. Like,
Okay.
I think growing up, I did not feel like I belonged, right? And that was okay because I was still trying to make my own way in the world.
Right.
Today, there's this emphasis of belonging, like you have to be part of everything is about the collective. Going back to what you were saying about the individual, there's no more
Yes.
individual and
Yes.
bringing that up. On the other side, the wealthier side, that is where that emphasis is. It's private tutors and sport, and you can look at that and be like, that is not fair. Look at all these resources, but the answer is not, you know take away from here and level the playing field so that there's not an opportunity to do that. I mean, you're actually creating a bigger divide by not having the challenging courses within the public school,
Oh,
because for
yeah.
someone like
Yeah.
who couldn't afford it, so like the rich kids, when you take away the honors classes, they'll go and pay for a private honors class
Sure.
online or whatever. The poor kids, so that's where I'm like, it's not fair, because you're only widening the gap between those that can afford it
I
and those that
understand.
can't.
Okay, so you're speaking about the fairness in terms of their proposed solution is more to take away from the top than to provide anything. Whereas before, let's face it, the honors classes were available to anyone who was capable of
Qualified.
doing honors classes. It was
Exactly.
irrelevant what neighborhood you lived in, what zip code you were in. So yeah, you might have a rich kid in the honors class, but you might have a very poor kid in the honors class. We've seen it many, many times where that's their opportunity to get ahead and to be
That's right.
prepared for, AP classes and college and so on. So I completely agree with you in that respect. If that's what you're talking about, yeah, there's no need to
Yeah.
push back. What I just meant was sometimes when the people on the school boards and when they talk about unfairness, they're saying kind of what you're saying. They're saying, well, these folks don't have XYZ at home. So we're going to take it away. We have to level the playing field down to the, mow the grass, not fertilize it. And so, yes, and you pointed that out in the film very, very well. For those again who haven't seen the film, there is time spent on, I guess it's board meetings that you attended, where they were talking about getting rid of the honors track, the honors courses in these schools. And the thing that blew my mind, Diana, and I really was, wanted to like yell at the screen, to be honest with you. They refused to have a vote.
Yeah. I
So they
sat at
wouldn't
the
even bring it to a vote.
Yeah. I sat at that board until 1 a.m. The board meeting went until 1 a.m., the first one. And then the second one, we're like, we got to demand the vote because we want these people to go on record so that they can be held accountable for their voting record. One of the board members was there for the last 13 years. So she basically observed and condoned the removal of these classes. And she
Right.
was one of those who did not want to take a vote, and even was upset with eh, the group of parents that are trying to bring back honors. There's about 1,200 of us that have been
Right.
writing letters for over a year now, for over a
Right.
year. So, I mean, it is. I have no, I have no words anymore, and that's why, I started with the whole honor stuff, but it was kind of a parallel track when I understood that this ethnic studies was coming along, and of
Sure.
course, as a Jew, I wanted to learn more about it because I heard there was controversy. Honestly, I was surprised there was controversy because I had no issue with ethnic studies. I think it's wonderful to learn about all the one,
Right. But I think you were probably thinking of it as like cultural studies, like you said in the movie, like, oh, we learned about each other's different backgrounds and foods and music and religion and, like melting
Well,
pot type of stuff.
and also because I sent my children to the Spanish immersion program within our public school system. So they grew up bicultural, bilingual, by all, and so I just assumed this is more of the same of that, except
Right.
now you're expanding it beyond the Spanish community. And that is why when I started looking through the actual curriculum, it was a 400-page binder that the
Right.
district put together, and I'm flipping through, and every single page was race essentialism. It was defining a race, and it was then this intersectionality triangle of how do you pit one race against each other. And honestly, I used to teach a class on the Holocaust when I was in college to Sunday school kids, but I remember, like, this race essentialism only leads to more tribalism, more anger, more, and that is what am realizing. There's instead of, and I think we have a ugly history, and I also think we have a wonderful history that we can look back and say, God, that was wrong, and we must do better, and we are a work in progress, and that, as we all are as individuals and as this country, we are learning from our mistakes. But what was happening in this curriculum is we're repeating our mistakes. We're actually not taking everything we've learned from World War II and slavery and everything. We're actually repeating it. We're just reversing it. So now the black is white and the white is black, and you just flip the script. And since when is two wrongs make a right? This is just wrong.
Right.
And then you see it with the increased violence in the school. And there's more fights. We've had 2 gun instances. My car was broken into, I'm not kidding, on the campus, and they basically didn't even want to show the video, because we you know there is no punishment, there is no accountability.
Sure.
That's part of it too, this whole restorative justice. How do kids learn when they make a mistake and we're not actually having them own their mistakes?
Right.
That's not happening either. So
What
there's so many
happens
layers.
when you one of the things I didn't see in the film, and probably because I mean, in half an hour, there's a limit to what you can cover, and maybe it didn't even happen. But when you've gone to these school board meetings, are there parents who, rather than stand up and say this bad thing happened and you didn't do anything or whatever, which I'm not saying it doesn't need to be done, but are there people who get up and ask questions, or have you been in a situation where you ever say, please explain, like, I'm going to pull from, there's a couple of questions here that caught my eye. Ellen asks, what's the reasoning behind churning out illiterate kids? I mean, the facts are the facts and the results are the results. And so, they've had their chance at doing all this stuff now for more than a decade. I mean, it's been more than a decade. They've been trying this sort of DEI approach to things. And there's more illiteracy, not less. And have people been asking, like, how do they defend their continued use of these things when the results are the results? If their goal is equal outcomes, how do they not get called on the carpet for having bad equal outcomes?
No, this is actually a problem, because when you actually look at the data, the numbers are going down. So
Yeah.
all of these experiments are, if you actually want to see what it, but I, the bottom line is, I think if you want answers, you have to follow the money. And I do think that DEI is a major industry. A lot of these professional developments are a major industry. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars are being wasted on these types of professional developments, and instead of addressing the poor outcomes. So I think at some point, like, the
Right.
house of cards is going to collapse, and we're very close to it. I mean, if you look at, a lot of parents are pulling out. I myself have decided to pull my daughter out of public school, and I'm a product of public school. My
But
husband's a product.
the things that you've been describing, though, are deeply traumatic to people, to someone like your daughter, to any child, really. I'm sorry. I think even the ones marching in the hallway screaming free, free Palestine, they may not know it, but they're being abused. They don't realize what's happening to them. But when your school teaches you propaganda and pushes you to believe things that simply are not correct, they're not true, in terms of the false history of the Middle East, in terms of Israel being an apartheid state, these things are just factually incorrect. Now, people can have different opinions on two-state solution, one-state solution, this blah 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 blah. Okay, but apartheid has a definition, and for any teacher to use that word in connection with Israel is utterly absurd and basically offensive to anyone who's lived in South Africa or anything like that. So
my biggest
or the Soviet Union.
My biggest frustration was actually with the principal who refused to notify the parents of the kids that were in that classroom where that inappropriate lesson was taught, refused to let them know that, hey, this lesson was taught and we need to, fix the whatever misinformation was
Do you
given.
think they didn't realize that it was misinformation? Do you think
Oh
they're
no,
that clueless?
no, they fully understand. I mean, this has been 5 months now since the original lesson was taught. We filed a formal complaint. I actually filed a formal complaint based on their
Oh,
policies.
you're saying after you filed it, they didn't tell
They
the other
did.
parents that this occurred?
That's right. The parents, and I remember during this formal complaint process, there was investigation, and the investigator, when we spoke with them, I said, if a science teacher taught students that the Earth was flat,
Right.
wouldn't you want to correct that information? Like, mistakes happen, the teacher maybe misspoke, but wouldn't you want to go back and tell the kids of that classroom, hey, we made a mistake, and but that has never happened. So there's about 90 kids walking around with misinformation
Oh,
about
there is
Jews
more
in
than
their.
90,
I
but
know,
yeah.
but I'm just talking about our. So
No.
you know
Yeah,
what I mean? That's the part that is the most frustrating. So if you have a principal that's not going to model the behavior of owning your mistakes, how do you
sure.
expect it from our children? And that's what I
Yeah,
meant about the, car broken. Like, things just get swept under the
yeah,
rug. Like some of the Holocaust jokes that I was saying. So that
yeah.
teacher was investigated, right? And we were
Yeah.
told that no, the kids misunderstood. She was giving examples of jokes not to say.
Who
Well,
would
then
do
don't,
that?
right? Then don't
Okay, I
say
mean,
them.
for frame of reference, folks, again, I have to take, just assume that some of you haven't seen the film, the documentary. This is Eli Steele's documentary, Killing America. You can watch it on Rumble. I hope that you do if you have not already seen it. 38 minutes of your life, invest the time and share it with others. What Diana is talking about is a teacher at the school who presented a lesson, and this is after October 7th. So, I mean, Jewish students in particular are reeling. I mean, people have family in Israel. That it's a really bad time. And the teacher presented the lesson on what's going on in the Middle East and framing it as narratives and saying to the students that you have the dominant narrative and the, whatever it is, the non-dominant narrative,
Counter
the
narrative.
counter narrative. All right. So very fascinating. She's presenting it as storytelling, that there's two competing stories. And of course, they're divided by what? Power. So the dominant narrative is not the one that is true. The dominant narrative is the one by the powerful people. And the counter narrative is the weak, oppressed people's story that doesn't get out because they're so oppressed. So framing it like that, then into that context, she talked about October 7th as being something that, again, Hamas is rebelling for resistance and against military targets, some civilians, but military targets, but civilians were the primary targets. So for students who may or may not have seen things on the internet, the parents may have protected them from it, et cetera, they're only getting this thing in the school of like, yeah, well, this isn't really true. It's just the powerful people's story about October 7th. And the real truth is the oppressed people of Gaza. And then in connection with that, she's saying, these are jokes that would be a bad idea, but nothing about it's wrong of you thousands of miles away to attack your fellow Jewish classmate because of something happening in Israel, whatever your beliefs are.
The
Nothing
jokes
like
were
that.
a different A different teacher. I just want to make
Oh, a
sure,
different
clear.
okay.
Yeah, that's my
But it
point is
shouldn't
we've
be
had
done it
right.
all at all. And this teacher, by the way, was a world history teacher, a world history teacher. You'd think
It
she would cover the history of this. She not only
Well,
did
but in this school, not to interrupt you, but my older daughter took AP US history, and her teacher did not believe in the Constitution, so she didn't teach it. She also didn't believe in World War II, so that was, glossed over. But then they spent 3 weeks looking for all the trans activists in the American Revolution. So what I'm trying to point out here is teachers have 100% leeway of how they
right,
spend time in the classroom, what they focus on, what they choose to skip. So that senior who's now graduating, who took AP US history and AP European history, she did not have one lesson on the Holocaust, not one between those two AP classes, because both of those teachers felt like that was not an appropriate use of time. So, I mean, this is the reality. So, unless parents are paying attention and looking at the assignments and asking, I think this just continues under the radar. I certainly did not pay attention until the pandemic. I knew none of this. And then kind of forced to during the pandemic to start looking, and then what I saw, I just, I
right.
felt compelled to speak up.
This is very important. You may not be aware of this, Diana, but I did do a show a few weeks back that talked about what you can call like sort of the secret curriculum. And I talked about how empathy can be used to teach kids to hate. And in connection with that, I showed how teachers can go to professional development classes, in particular about things like the Middle East, things where it's not going to be in a textbook, and they take these courses so helpfully produced by NGOs and other nonprofits that have, funding coming from Qatar and places like that. And they're full of inaccuracies, and they've been going on for it's been going on for 20 years. So it's not like a new thing. So for many of these teachers, and it sounds like Ms. Gentile Montgomery, the teacher featured in the film, is one of them. They learn what they learn from extremely biased sources, full of inaccuracies. Then they go into the classroom and they just repeat it. So her slides looked like they were taken with the fake map of Israel and everything. They look like they were taken verbatim from one of these professional development courses. And she even said that, did she not?
There was a reference to Turkish media.
Yeah,
What are we doing? That
right.
like whatever that reference was, they're like on some terrorist watch list or something.
Right.
No, the teachers can bring TikTok videos. I mean, my daughter spends, her time in ethnic studies class watching cartoons, and they're cartoons that I wouldn't even show a second grader because it's, not there's no educational value. It's honestly it's a way that I think when teachers don't have the right uh, I don't want to say skills because I think these are bright teachers, but perhaps the framework has not been taught, or then they create their own. And so like with ethnic studies, there is no textbook, right? It's you just create your own whatever you want to teach. So
Right.
that's how you
Well,
get
that's
these
true
TikTok
too.
videos.
It's true too of Common Core that when we moved away in 1983 from a knowledge-based curriculum nationwide and started and adopted Common Core, and people think Common Core is a curriculum. It isn't. All that Common Core is a core set of standards. But what a standard is versus what we had before, which was the knowledge base, is saying this material will be covered, not student will know how to do X or student will demonstrate knowledge of X. So that radically changed how we educate students in America, because before, in order to sort of graduate high school, you had to demonstrate knowledge of the Constitution. That's a vastly different thing than teacher will cover the Constitution, because define cover. Cover is going to mean, and if it's not centrally, there's no rubric that says what coverage really looks like. They give you a little bit, but it's not the standard is so vague, especially in the humanities and English. It's very, very vague. And social science, actually only math has anything resembling a standard. But if the
For now.
principles, yeah,
For
not
now.
now, thank you, Joe Bowler, but but they have But they now you can literally hire a teacher, it would seem, like off the street. I mean, if they had the right credential, they don't have to, the teacher doesn't have to demonstrate knowledge base, like of certain knowledge, not base of certain knowledge. And then they can go and use things off the internet and whatever to cover the material. And the teacher doesn't even know if it's accurate. I've seen this so many times. I'm a tutor. And so kids will come to me, this is my homework. And I'm on the other side of the country from you, but same story. I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is the homework. Yes, this is my lesson, and it's full of mistakes, like chock full of things that are simply factually not correct about the American Revolution or World War II or whatever you want to say. And I don't know what to do in that situation. I'm like, I can't really help the child with the homework as is because it's wrong. And then when I tell the parents, they're shocked. How can this be? This teacher's been a teacher for 15 years, 25 years, whatever years. And I'm like, that may be so, but either the teacher doesn't recognize that this is false because they don't know or they don't care.
Well,
These are my options.
it's interesting that you say that, because so when that blow up school board meeting, that the teachers actually spoke up in defense of Miss Montgomery, and Miss Montgomery was not the only teacher who taught that lesson. It's just the only one that initially, when we found out about it, that we had the name. The school wouldn't give us the second teacher's name. I want to I don't want to single her out because there was another teacher, but another teacher spoke up and said, I don't know why everyone is having this issue, because we've been teaching this type of lesson for over 10 years. This was at another high school within the district. And I'm like, that's a problem, that that something like this could be taught for 10 years and nobody even knew, because it's the same, factually incorrect information. So then fast forward, you're not surprised why we have, people stopping the Golden Gate Bridge and all of this stuff, right? Because for the last decade, we have been indoctrinating kids into these fallacies.
This is from her presentation. I managed to find the screenshot. Dominant narrative. It's even worse than I described. Definition: an explanation or story that is told to benefit the dominant social group's interests and ideologies. So the implication to the student, it's very subtle, but it's in there, is it's a lie.
That's right. That's right. And the thing is, so if facts are now the dominant narrative, so then the counter narrative, isn't that the lie? Like, it's just confusing kids.
And then, here, what are the dominant? So rather than asking the students to identify even the facts of, like, who are the players, what happened, what is their position? I mean, I could get behind a lesson that just said, these are the facts as presented by this side of the conflict. These are the facts as presented by that conflict, side of the conflict, at least, whatever. The truth, probably, whatever. But what is happening in Israel and Palestine? What are the dominant and counter narratives? But they've already told the students that a dominant narrative benefits. Why would anyone suppose that a counter narrative doesn't benefit the user of the counter narrative? Like, why would anyone suppose that? People don't tell stories that hurt them. Even if you believed this, which I don't. I mean, I don't subscribe to narrative power structures, and rather I look at truth, facts, and evidence and things like that. But even if I did, even if I sort of went that way, logic would dictate that everybody tells a story that benefits them, regardless of their position and power. It would be stupid, especially if you feel you're oppressed, to tell a story that doesn't benefit you.
Right.
How does that make any sense?
Facts no longer matter because it's all about the lived experience, right? So if a child's lived experience is different, for me, as a physician, it's like anecdotal evidence versus actual evidence-based medicine. And, as bad as, and it's horrible what's happening in education, this doesn't stop here, right? We're seeing it at the medical school level. We're seeing, some of the things that are.
What is a woman really?
Right.
I'm not a biologist, so I don't know. But if you are a biologist, you can no longer say what even a biologist would say, because that's offensive too. So, yeah, it's pretty bad. And I guess the part that might be difficult for some of you out there watching the film, and where I wanted to talk to Diane about this also, is that here we've talked to you about DEI, we talked to you about the thrust being on equity, power imbalances, oppressor, oppressed, ethnic studies being really about surfacing who's oppressed and who isn't, as opposed to melting pot type of way of looking at the country. We've talked about fairness being more about cutting the tall poppies rather than making sure that kids who need language immersion get it, or making sure that kids who need honors get it. And we've now sort of, as somebody pointed out, and I think I saw it in one of the comments up here, what they've done is they've taken the word fairness and here, this is it. We shouldn't conflate the term fairness or unfairness with that which is just unfortunate. So they have done that. They've conflated real fairness with, the kind that's like you're fortunate and you're unfortunate, and that's not really what those words mean. And what's happening as a consequence is this rise in anti-Semitism. And as the film points out, I think very well, but I understand that it's difficult sometimes for people to connect these dots. That's where it comes from. So in other words, the anti-Semitism doesn't just pop up in a vacuum, nor is it just this historical cycle that, it's time for anti-Semitism again. It's been 75 years, time to be anti-Semitic again. What happens is when a society starts to have sufficient number of problems and descend into a kind of tribalism, which we have seen repeated through history many, many times, not just World War II, but like many, many times over thousands of years. The anti-Semitism will surface because the Jew, being a diaspora people, first of all, but also being a people, I think, that has a language, a religion, obviously the other cultural elements that gets preserved and carried with them wherever they go. So no matter how much Jews assimilate and become French or English or German or Polish or, whatever, they're still Jewish and see themselves very much as Jewish with all that comes with that, and still yet a teeny, teeny, tiny minority. So first goes to the Jews. Like first, we're going to pick on the Jews. That's where it goes first, because that's almost always the tiniest population. It's easiest to pick on and ready-made conspiracy theories. It doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on. You're too communist, you're too capitalist, you're too successful, you're too whatever. So we start there, but as the film points out, it doesn't end there. That's just the starting point. And it's like the canary in the coal mine that, you when you see anti-Semitism rising, that is your giant red warning flag. Tribalism it's too much. It's too much. Something is amiss. And if you had to tell the audience, in your opinion, Diana, lots of things are wrong. What would you pull out right now? Like if you could go in, you could wave a magic wand and get something out of your school district, and they just gave you one choice, what would you eliminate?
It's the oppressor-oppressed framework. I think that everything that is wrong with what is happening today is based on that oppressor-oppressed framework. And, this is why I'm actually upset with our legacy Jewish organizations, because a lot of them feel, well, we should just work with ethnic studies, because if we can be put in the oppressed, then everything will be fine, right? Because then we'll just get lumped in the oppressed and anti-Semitism will go away. And I'm like, but the framework is still bad. Whether or not we're now the good people because we're oppressed, which actually is antithesis to Jews. We don't define ourselves by our victimhood, right? But as soon as you base, instead of an individual human being and what they have to offer, base it on their immutable characteristics that they have no control over, like skin color or genitalia, and then you take and you give them some kind of a value judgment based on those immutable characteristics, you've lost. I mean, that's it. How do you climb out of something that you had no control over to begin with? So that is, to me, the biggest if there's one thing I can snap my fingers, get rid of that framework.
It's also demonstrably false. And what I mean by that is that, it's almost like the way a 3-year-old might look at the world, that who doesn't have the ability to look at a variety of different inputs and all kinds of variables, and the, I hate to use the word nuance, but there it is, that individual, as you point out, individual lives are just so complicated, and that even if we look at group outcomes, if we were going to do that, you still have a wide variety of different outcomes. I mean, does it mean that white basketball players are oppressed because they're not represented as 60% of the basketball teams, like they would be 60% of the general population? It these things don't make sense. The fact that there are disparate outcomes, we used to know this, like instinctively, we used to know that because people are different. It's like people are tall, people are short, people are, good at music, good at math, whatever. And especially in the school environment. So I can understand people who might say, gosh, socioeconomically, this or that, or, they might look at some other realm and say, how come this is happening or that is happening? But to look in a school environment and where it really is, much to my chagrin, I don't like it, kind of a one size fits all, here's the classrooms, here's the building, you're all going to go in here. And then say the fact that there are disparate outcomes is because of some social construct of oppression somewhere, and what that, to me, negating everything else that is happening, and everything is happening in those individuals' lives, and what the teachers are like, and what that strikes me as like magical thinking. Like, I need one answer for all the things, and it's going to be oppressed or oppressed. And yet, whenever we try to bring up that it's simply empirically false, that this outcome was a result of some kind of oppression, or that this outcome was the result of being an oppressor, the poor Asian kid didn't succeed beyond, like whatever, because he was an oppressor. That doesn't make any sense. It's like you're racist or a bad person for even trying to poke a hole in the thing. So what concerns me, of course, this is axiomatic at this point that this is so, but the kids don't know that. So in other words, my concern is that your daughter and the other children in these schools not only aren't having these conversations, they're not capable of having these conversations.
What's more sad is a lot of them do get it, and they know they have to remain silent. So at one of our screenings here in Palo Alto, Jacob, who was in the film,
Oh,
he
he's
is the
brilliant. Yeah.
student trustee.
Yes.
After each screening, we do a panel discussion and audience questions. And one of the things that he brought up is that a lot of his friends, because they know they need letters of recommendation and they know that they need good grades to, for their next step in their educational
Mhm.
careers, that they rather just write what they know the teacher wants to hear than what they really think. And for me, that is the worst, because if we're not cultivating critical thinking skills, if we're not challenging our kids to think beyond their beliefs,
Right.
because right now it's like a formula. It's like
Sure.
you have
Yeah.
to think this way and everywhere, and I think Eli did an incredible job with those little robots. It's like everything has to be the same. Well,
The
that would still
chickens
be
cracked me up. They had these little chickens in the chicken coop, and I keep thinking of like the schools they want to build, the schools of tomorrow with the VR headsets, whatever. I said it's going to be like a chicken coop. It's going to be like they're just
well,
sitting there incubating a little egg, like they're just, oh,
yeah. I actually saw a big change, here in Silicon Valley. We probably got the school issued iPads sooner than just about everywhere else. And
yeah.
that was when I first saw, there was a change. Like kids were just so into these, that in the iPads and the screens, that there was no more. There's something to be said about turning a page when you're reading, and
Oh,
thinking and writing notes, and so the way we actually are teaching kids to
that's right.
think has completely. And as a neurologist, when
Well,
my
you.
my patients, I work mostly with elderly, Parkinson's patients, and they're constantly trying to challenge their minds. So they want to do, these online. I'm like, no, don't do that. Participate in the world,
That's right.
like go out and take an art class, create new connections in the real world, because these gadgets and these games, you get good at playing that whatever luminosity, whatever game that is, but that actually doesn't translate into the real world, and that is what we're seeing.
Right.
And I think, obviously with social media,
Right.
I mean, there's many
Well,
tangents we can go.
there is, I know for a fact that CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, and a lot of the companies that are offshoots of that are actively working to use neurolinguistic programming and other tools to quite literally reprogram our children neurologically. They are going backwards to Skinner, and they make no bones about it. They are very much in the behaviorist stimuli, response, stimuli, like give the right stimuli, get the right response. And they're writing papers about it. They're talking about it. And their goal is to do this because they think this is the only way we're going to perfect society, have a perfect, for people to agree to eat the bugs, to not drive gas powered cars, to live in 15-minute cities, to give up on their quaint little notions of individual liberty and freedom of speech and do their government assigned job and all the stuff. In order to do that, we have to do away with individual agency and the drive to have it, maintain it, etc. And the only way we can do that is start very, very young, orienting these children towards group, like being part of a group. They call it collective responsibility, collective identity, collective, everything is collective. And so I think ethnic studies is one of those things. But what I found is interesting is there's sort of two different branches on this tree. You have the technocrat branch that wants to take the people like Jacob, the ones who are super smart, right, and orient them this way so they can write all the code and write all the programs and do all the things that are the smart people are going to do, right? And then the kids who aren't going to go that way, they should be group oriented. Don't take your brilliance and orient it towards yourself. You got to, the ones who aren't likely to go that way, or it would just take a lot of work. It would take a lot of work to get them there. Okay. They're probably perfectly capable, but they don't speak English, this, that. Activists. So they'll create the demand for the Green New Deal, the decolonization, the degrowth, all the things that Jacob and co are going to build or design or whatever. And this is going to be how society is going to function. And it's all there. It's like they're not even hiding it anymore. So what I saw watching the film might be different from what you experienced being in it. Is I saw the people, like especially that president, the board president, I saw what that takes. In other words, to implement what they want to implement. By they, I'm talking like WEF, George Soros, that kind of thing. You need people like that board president. So you can't have a Diana Blum or a Jacob, or even the outgoing president of the board. You in too many. You get one. You get like a token. Hey, this one here or there that appease the people so they'll feel like they're heard, right? You can't have zero. But to make sure no vote happens, to make sure the board meeting goes on until 1:00 in the morning, to make sure that people are just worn down, and the really bright ones out, let them spend their own money on their stuff. We need to spend the money on making activists. And that's what it is. It's like we're going to funnel you into these two things just by attrition. We're just going to wear you down with the sheer onerousness of it all. And that's what I like from my 30,000-foot view with all that. I was like watching it going, these poor parents, they genuinely want to make a difference. And then I feel like the giant black pill coming in going, it's not going to work. Well, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be so negative, but I saw that woman and I thought to myself, she's not going to hold this vote. Before you guys showed that she didn't hold a vote, I knew she wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Yeah, I mean, they're teaching our kids a learned helplessness, and
Yeah,
then
that's
they
exactly what it
scratch
is.
their heads and wonder, why do we have a teen mental health crisis?
They
Well,
don't wonder though.
you
They know
they're
why. That's their
creating
job
it.
description. Create it, because then the community school is going to come in and pump them full of drugs. They
In
don't
all
wonder. They know
seriousness,
exactly why. They don't wonder.
it's right,
They say they wonder. But you see, the only reason to even call out that there is a mental health crisis at this point is to blame it on parents.
right,
Because
right.
when they blame it on you, Diana, then what they can do is say what you really need to do is drop your child off at the age of 3 at the community preschool, and then they're going to stay till 7 p.m. and then, you can pick them up and put them in bed, and pretty soon it'll be a dormitory. But, this is, I think, all by design, by people far away from the board president. Doesn't know this is her job, but that is her job. Like, in other words, the type of people getting picked for these tasks or promoted by the teachers union, or their campaign funded, or the suggestion made that they run, or whatever, are the people who play ball, are the collectivist team players who will do the thing when the thing needs to be done, whether they're aware of what role they play or not. Most of them are not. And then in comes you and some of the other parents, and you feel like you're in the twilight zone, don't you? You feel like somebody turned the world upside down.
Well, that's why I feel like as dangerous as that word equity is, I actually think the word belonging, because DEIB is now I think the belonging is even worse. I think the belonging is suddenly it's the compelled speech. It's the, you're not with us, then you're against us. And it's like, well, can't I have my own views? Can't we just have a conversation about why I'm challenging what you just said? That's not okay. So it's actually okay to exclude if you're trying to challenge in any
Yeah.
way. So that,
Right.
yeah, it's but I
I
think
do have a question about
conversations like this hopefully will help.
I do have a question about the film.
Mhm.
Another question about the film distribution, because we really talked very little about the censorship. So as we said at the outset of the show, Eli tried to get the movie, seen. I know that is it Christine who is she was in the film as well. She's trying to get the film seen, and is actually doing a great job, as I understand it, having showings and discussions and things, which is fantastic. I would love to see that more. But um what was the deal? Why did they make him take the film down from YouTube, and why has it been so difficult?
So there's an allegation made by a minor. The MA Chronicle, which is the school newspaper, it's run by students. It's funded by the school or PTA, or public funds. And there was some articles that the students had published, and in them there were a few videos and some pictures. And Eli, when he creates a documentary, he pulls from many different sources and then puts his own creative spin on things and commentary and whatnot. And the student filed some complaints saying that this was copyright information. Now, in our local newspaper here, two professors, one from Stanford and one I think from Santa Clara, weighed in on this because, quickly within 24 hours, the film was removed from 3 out of 5 platforms. And it's interesting because those law professors first decided to bash Eli as a far right wing extremist, bash the film,
Eli,
but
far
El-
right wing
right,
extremist.
right, but agreed that he was protected by the fair use whatever law. So I think there really is no claim, which really, again, I'm not a lawyer, and Eli's dealing this on his own, but as my personal opinion, you know,
Sure,
I, I I wonder, how is it that these mega platforms are able to just take down somebody's livelihood? Because at the
sure.
end of the day, this is just a single dad taking care of two kids, and this is his job, filmmaking,
Yeah.
based on an allegation on a minor.
Well, and fair
Because
use. It's fair
right,
if
it's
you put it like you said, that's the school, which is publicly funded
public.
newspaper that presumably she wanted everyone to see when that was online, and everyone in the world could have seen it. I could have done a reaction video about it, and people could see it. That's why you do it. That you don't put yourself on video if you don't expect that people are going to use it. I've had reaction videos made of me that are not flattering, and it is what it is. It's fair use.
And my question is, where's the adult in the room? Where's the journalism teacher? Who is allowing these kids to make, or was it actually, I don't know. I mean, there needs to be an investigation to figure out how could something like this happen.
Right.
I mean, I'm thinking of just filing one to have an investigation because I still don't understand how this happened.
Right.
Um,
Well, in some cases, we know that the kids, especially kids who work for newspapers, and it used to be just at the college level, but now it's also at the high school level, um, they get a lot of training, especially through ethnic studies teachers and coaches from outside, nonprofit organizations and clubs. And on the Palestinian side, they've made no bones about it that, and have for years now, that they're specifically going into high schools and colleges to train journalism students and train young journalists in what they want them to say and what they want them to do. It's been explicitly stated that is our goal, is to teach them how to produce this propaganda. Now, one of the tools they use, as we know, is the stall, delay, file complaints, instigate something that somebody reacts to you and then go, look at them victimizing me. I mean, they did that with the Berkeley professor. So they're trained to do these things. So I wouldn't even be surprised if this student knows perfectly well that it's fair use, but says, I want to delay and cast aspersions on the viewing of this film. I want it to be seen by fewer people. So the easiest way for me to do that is file a complaint. Because I'm a minor and this and that, there'll be a takedown and it'll be off long enough that the momentum is gone. The release is, stifled. And even if YouTube were at some point to say, it's fair use, it takes forever. It takes forever for them to decide these things. They have a backlog. And then it's like, oh, the damage is done. Right. So that very well could have been what happened. Not sure we'll ever know. But this is something that I've learned is you almost have to be one step ahead of them and anticipate what might somebody do or say, and, check all the dots, check the boxes and all that. But also I wanted to ask you about the Jewish organizations. You mentioned them. You said the legacy Jewish organizations that, no, let's try to get on the intersectionality chart. I'm going to just not say what I think because it won't be nice. But I was surprised to not see the Federation showing this film. I was surprised to not see lots of big national. I was surprised to not see Stand With Us, showing the film, and other camera on campus and other things. Why?
So I wouldn't put Stand With Us and camera, and I actually think they are. And in fact, we're on April 28th. We are having a screening up in
Good.
Marin,
Okay.
and someone.
But the Federation, I think,
But
should
the
be doing something.
Federation and JCRC, and actually we tried to screen it at the JCCs, and like the San Francisco JCC wanted $10,000. Now we screened it in San Francisco for $800. So my point is, like, do they really want to help screen this, or are they creating roadblocks and roadblocks for us to actually get this film out? I have no words. I think that everything to date has been behind closed doors, and cultivating our relationships with our allies. And trust me, the guardrails will save us. And this is basically what's been told to the Jewish community for the last several
I
years
think maybe
about.
they need to pick up a history book.
Yeah, exactly. I my personal opinion, I don't belong to these Jewish organizations. I personally think that we have a leadership failure within the Jewish community on multiple levels. And luckily, there are new organizations, like Stand With Us, like Camera, like Jewish Institute of Liberal Values, who actually help sponsor our premiere, that are rising up and challenging the legacies. um, the question is, are the donors going to follow? And I think that's where this film comes in, and that's where discussions like this comes in, because I think most people just have, even today, have just not been
Right.
educated, and this is how
Well,
we get the word out.
I think if there are any potential donors watching, or this could be shown to them, what I would say, my pitch would be, as I said at the outset, it, it it's the anti-Semitism is rising, I think, predictably, because of the oppressor oppressed narrative, because of oppression is not tied to whether your group has ever literally experienced oppression. Oppression is really much more tied to, do the members of your group see themselves as individuals? Do the members of your group occupy positions of power in society, especially in any kind of disproportionate way. And by disproportion, I mean relative to your numbers in the society, not you don't deserve it. And if the answer to those two questions is yes, we see ourselves as individuals and not as victims and all this other stuff, and we are very successful, and no matter how oppressed we've ever been, we just keep coming back and keep coming back, then you're solidly in the oppressor category based on the critical theory dynamic. That's just how it is. You're not going to talk your way back into that with more anti-Semitism education, more Holocaust education. It isn't going to be. And in fact, what I've seen is every time that people try to bring up the Holocaust in this context and say, but the Holocaust, what the very next thing out of the ethnic studies DEI person's mouth will be, and that is why you ought to know better. That is why Israel ought to know better. That is why what Israel is doing is so wrong, because it's like you now have an extra obligation. You can't get away from it. You can't run away from it. Once you've been labeled oppressor, it sticks like glitter. It's just not going away. So I think the better argument is for those people who aren't already sold on this oppressor narrative, the vast middle who's kind of like, I don't know what's going on, what's happening. Then the answer is it's going to affect everyone. It already is affecting. We know it's affecting Christians. We know it's affecting Asians. We know it's and Asians indiscriminately. What's an Asian anyway? We're talking about so many countries. Like we go from Pakistan and India all the way to, Taiwan, right? It's like everybody in between. So, these populations are absolutely being negatively affected. Our other institutions are being negative. You point out medicine, the law. So I think the argument is less about like, don't pick on Jews, although, yeah, that upsets me greatly. I'm Jewish. So it's like, I don't want to see the anti-Semitism growing. I just think we have an opportunity to explain to people the value, the individualism that's threatened, the real ethnic diversity, beauty of our country that's being threatened. And that the irony is, in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have something that is extremely monolithic in terms of thought, something that's very exclusive of people who will not share those thoughts. Yeah. And we have something that is not only not resulting in equal, well, the only equal outcomes that are resulting are bad ones. Right. Illiteracy, violence, and all these things. And I just think if Eli's film could be shown in that context and explain, like, this is just showing you the warning. This is like all the pieces coming together to show you that America is under threat. And that affects all of us. The film says it explicitly.
It's basically anti-liberal values. If you no longer can think critically, if reason is now somehow labeled a white supremacy, kind of trait, that this is anti-Western civilization. I mean, and they say it. That's when they say decolonization. That is what they mean. So, right. October 7th was just the first example of what, how it actually gets played out.
Well, I think, do you think that one of our challenges is that even the term Western civilization at this point has been turned into kind of like a dirty concept, and that maybe what we need to do is to remind people that I wish we could call it something else. I mean, even when we call it liberal values, then people get all twitchy because they think it means politically liberal as opposed to, like intellectually liberal.
But when I say America is a work in progress, we have made progress because of these liberal values. So I actually wrote an article shortly after the first screening. It got published in the Jewish Journal. And I said, what are they afraid of? Meaning, like, right. What is the school afraid of, right? But I talked about how, the reason we have women's rights and ending of slavery and gay marriage today, it's because of Western liberal values. That's how we got here. So why would you throw out, the baby with the bathwater?
Well, the other thing is whenever let's call them Western, and let's call them liberal, whatever you want to call them, whenever these values and these um, uh, ideas are adopted, translated, whatever, even no matter where they get planted, people do better. And the other thing I want to point out to people watching, and maybe to even the donors listening, is the reminder we've forgotten that unlike many native tribes, let's say, for example, in the Americas before the explorers came here, or let's say native tribes that did not have access below the equator, they didn't have the North Star to navigate. So they were more, tribal in the literal sense for longer because of the lack of exploration northward and from north to south. The beauty, what Europe had was the inability to develop a monoculture. It really isn't a monoculture. So, for example, Marco Polo takes a walk and comes back and, hey, guys, gunpowder. I mean, maybe that's not exactly what happened, but, gunpowder and the weapons that the West had came, the gunpowder from China, the printing press, China, paper making, China. Then you have other things that were from one part of Europe to another part of Europe. So even within Europe, you have, trigonometry developed in the East comes to help Columbus in the West to go across the. So even European culture was a mishmash made possible by the ships and the navigation and the constellations and the science and the math of all these cultures interacting. They were not physically isolated by oceans. They were smaller oceans. They could walk places. And I think we forget that. And people tend to talk about Western culture as if it's this white, Anglo, whatever. But no, it's not. It's everything. And it was made up of stuff from the East and the South and all these different places. And that what worked and what helped and what advanced humankind and science and math and so on lasted and was then passed to other cultures who adopted it and molded it. It's not cultural appropriation. It's cultural evolution.
That's right.
And I think if we could take this film as like the seed film for that conversation, for like maybe, something follow up, like, okay, let's talk about what is America, is the evolution from that. Then that came across the ocean. And people go, oh, but then it encountered native tribes. Yes. And many tragic and horrible things occurred. No one's going to dispute that. However, we also have native tribes that have then gone and done, great things, contributed to our lives. The Wind Talkers in World War II. There, we have interacted with each other in very positive ways. Our students, our kids are not learning this. So as you point out in the film, they're not able to champion the good that America has done and could still do with, their help when they grow up. But I would love to see donors use this film for that conversation as the starting point for that conversation. And as important as it is to the fight against anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism is a symptom.
That's right.
And I say that even as a Jew, it's a symptom of us going the wrong way, very far the wrong way. And every time that's popped up in history, it ends up in a very bad situation for everyone, not just Jews.
That's right. And that's why, I am inspired by all the non-Jews that are involved in the film who really are speaking up, and what the other point I want to make is a lot of people initially volunteered, but at the end, the ones that actually went on camera and, are mostly either immigrants or children of immigrants. And I think it's because we know what's at stake. We've come from the countries where where this goes, if not, nipped in the bud. And I think that's why we feel so compelled to, start the dialogue, have challenge us, tell us where you think our flaws are, but let's have that discussion. Not having the discussion is what the problem is why we're so polarized.
I have one last question for you, and then I'll let you go. And thank you for being so patient. Ellen also asked, where are the pushback kids, the ones that point out the nonsense? I know you mentioned briefly, you said that there are kids, your daughter, friends, Jacob, et cetera, who see it, who get it, who are like, this is not okay, right? They don't like any of this, but they feel trapped. Is there anything that we adults who also see it since we're not making any headway with the school boards to help our kids, is there something that we could do to empower the kids to stand up for themselves? After all, it is their education, and they do have more freedom of speech in the classroom than we have as their parents. Is there something that we could do to help them feel less vulnerable and more empowered to speak out without having to be on the rep on the school board? Are should we be starting an organization? Like there is Camera and Stand With Us for the college kids. Should we be doing something at the high school level before it gets that far, or even
Well,
earlier?
well, I know, like, I am involved with the Jewish Institute of Liberal Values. We're actually starting a Bay Area chapter here, and they have been instrumental in addressing individual issues that arise. So we've had numerous, I mean, I listed several in the beginning of the documentary. We've had numerous uh, kids who unfortunately have been how should I put it? Abused by their own teachers, and the teachers refuse to meet with the parents. The principal refuses to meet with the parents, and so we bring in, someone like the Jewish Institute of Liberal Values or Lori from the Deborah Project to come in and say, no, you guys are breaking the law. This is not okay. And sadly, I think that the schools and the school districts rather dish out money for legal fees than actually doing the right thing. And ultimately, this may be fought in, as much as, like, I am weary about the California legal system, given everything. I still believe in this country, and I still believe that at the end of the day, the law will protect us, at least for now. And so I think for now, the legal route seems to be the only avenue that we have, because we are not being listened to at the school boards. I mean, this is over a year. The film is, a small smidge of time. We've been dealing with this for over a year and getting nowhere. So legal seems to be our only option right now.
So October 7th must have just been a gut punch because you were already dealing with this, and then to have that occur, and then what happened almost instantly,
Yeah.
the reaction.
It was predictable. In 2021, when I wrote a 3-page letter to the school board outlining my concerns with their ethnic studies curriculum and the impact on mental health and everything, I mean, like, you could have predicted what happened. And my 3-page letter, I had a 1-sentence response from one of the school board members saying, "We talked to our teachers and they're happy with how things are." Period. That was it. So, I mean, yeah. I don't, it's mind blowing.
It there wow. I have to thank you so much for joining me and helping us understand better, like what went on, and also for just giving me the opportunity to bounce some of these ideas off you, because as I was watching the film, I was like, I want to ask her about this and I want to talk about if she sees this or sees that. But yeah, I think the film nails it, though. It nails the idea, as we said at the beginning of the show, if you're just tuning in or watching on the replay, that Killing America does a fantastic job of explaining to the viewer that you've got this, conspiracy theory being taught to our children all over the country, that America is not a land of opportunity. It is a place of oppression and, oppressed people, that is divided by mostly race, ethnicity, etc. And it can't get any better, so that you have to just know and be conscious at all times that it's there, and fight back and protest and all this kind of thing. And that our kids are, being pushed to a kind of equity that really is just a low standard of achievement for all, holding back kids who want to succeed and not really helping kids who need help to succeed. And the result is going to be that America is going to cease to be America if we don't do something to stop this process of, I would call it, like a controlled demolition of what makes us great. It's We're going to lose America. America is going to be like worse, in my opinion, than other countries that were never America to start with, because we do have so many different people in this country. So the opportunity for tribalism is even bigger. Like
Yeah.
the but way we could balkanize is like across dozens of different. I don't even want to think about how many different factions we could be
Well, and
divided into.
they're now called affinity groups, right?
Right.
So you can just manipulate the language and make it sound good, but
No,
actually
no,
you're grouping people based on immutable characteristics. It is
no.
the antithesis of what America
Yeah.
is.
So if you want to see what it looks like when this idea infests a school district, watch the film. You'll see Menlo Park, you'll see California, and you'll understand more about kind of the feeder schools, the ins and outs, how it happens. But most importantly, I think you will understand the mechanics of the equity project, and then how that how it manifests in ethnic studies that then gives rise to these protests that you're seeing. It gives rise to, today it's anti-Semitism. A couple summers ago it was Black Lives Matter. Maybe next summer it'll be something else. It almost doesn't matter who today's victim du jour is that they're going to be marching for. It's the same story retold. And the thing that is just so creepy right now about it being anti-Semitism is what's going on in the Middle East and the historical reality of the Holocaust. So we have that in the rearview mirror that gives people a lot of anxiety, justifiably. And I think that's why. So I hope there are people watching who can help get this movie seen more. I want to thank
Well, we
those who
do
couldn't come, who were in it.
we have, April 21st, we have a showing in Chicago in the north
Yes.
suburbs, and then April 27th, we're gonna be in Santa Cruz as part of the Jewish Film Festival, and April 28th up in Marin County. So with we are doing these private screenings all with the panel talking about, whatever the audience questions are, so.
Right. Well, I'm on my own. I'm sort of trying privately to figure out how to get one in Charlotte. So we have,
We'll work on it.
we're trying, but those of you watching, if you have ideas, also, if you want to have a watch party for this movie, it's on Rumble. You can always grab it, cast it from your phone to, to a screen, grab, 10 to 20 people, watch it, have a conversation. If you're in a PTA group or some kind of a grassroots organization with other parents, I highly encourage you to watch it and talk about it. You might be surprised to find out what's going on in your very own district that mirrors what Diana and others in the film experienced. And the more that you understand what it all means, the better at a minimum, you'll be able to help your kids in your own home. I'm sure it's helped your daughter to know that her mom gets it and mom is there and mom is like, this is whack. You're not crazy.
She
Right?
I mean, she's appreciative and she also is like, "Do you have to be always out there?" But she's
No, I know. I
appreciative.
get that too. But I think deep down there, they, as you point out, there are kids who get it. They just feel stifled. They feel censored, which is like the title says of the show. It's the hypocrisy, DEI, equity. Everyone is welcome and belonging is so important, but not you. And don't
Right.
say that. And you can't think that. And that's inappropriate. And it's like, obviously, you don't really
Exactly.
want DEI at all. That's just a lie. So anyway, Diana, thank you so, so much for doing this. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. This was, broadcast live. The replay will be up immediately. Please do like and share the broadcast. It helps build, the algorithm sees that and more people will see it. And I will be back next Monday with another show. So thank you all so very much for coming. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.